So here we are again. It's the end of another wonderful summer and the beginning of school. My hope today is to help you transition with your children back to that school year and to make things a little easier. I'm going to be talking today about setting limits with your children, young children, even through high school. Some of the basics are the same no matter what age, and some of them are a little bit different. Hang on, we'll cover it all. I want to make clear that I don't have any chidushim. I don't have any great new ideas. What I have for you is review. I have some practical thoughts. I have some tips, if you may say. But basically, the idea is to review, review, review. And if each one of you take one thing from what you learn on this lecture, then you will be able to change your parenting a little bit and help you set limits for your children. Some of what I'm going to tell you today comes from 20 plus years of experience as a therapist, and some of what I'm going to tell you today comes from 25 plus years as a mom. Both are important. Some of the ideas worked for me, some of them didn't, but I'm going to give them all over to you so that you can choose what works for you and for your family. It's really amazing how sometimes one new parenting idea can change how an entire family functions. So the summer's over, that restful, relaxing time, and we're into the new year. We're into school, we're into the Yom Tovim, we're into the hustle and bustle. And I actually have a confession to make. My children are all grown now, but when they were younger, the end of the summer was the worst time for me. Almost as bad as the beginning of school. While many of my friends were so happy to have their homes and to have their life back after the summer, I wasn't. I love the summer. I still love the summer. I love the fact that things are relaxed, that there's no rules that have to be kept to, that there's no responsibilities with the kids that have to be adhered to. Yes, they need to have food, they need to sleep, they need clean clothing, but it's much easier. It's just much more relaxed. I never missed homework. I never liked doing it, and we all do homework for our children, we know. I didn't like checking it. I didn't like having to be on time for the bus. I didn't necessarily like having to make lunches or have dinner ready when they got home. In the summer, no one seems as hungry as they are during the year. In the summer, no one seems as tired in the morning when they go to bed late. It just seems much more relaxed. But then I also realized that I ended up only giving rules and setting limits for my family about 9 months out of the year. And for 3 months, it was sort of loosey-goosey there, and that didn't work. And the reality is that I realized that as parents and for my children's health, it was much better to keep some sort of routine, some sort of limits, some sort of boundaries and rules for the entire year. And this becomes even more important as children get older. Teenagers need consistency. Everybody needs consistency. But when it comes to rules and boundaries, as kids get older, the consistency becomes more and more important. Limit setting creates a calmer and safer atmosphere in your home. This is a really important statement because kids crave that consistency, they crave the structure, and even if we don't always want to institute it, we do it for the sake of our children because it really is important. Limit setting is one of the basics of parenting. It's also one of the really hard parts of parenting. It's something that I think every parent struggles with. Unfortunately, limit setting also comes with another basic of parenting, although not quite as positive of one, and that is power struggles. Now, many parents, especially young parents, will say to me, well, I don't want to set so many rules in my house. I don't want to set so many limits because I don't want to get into a power struggle with my children. The reality is the power struggles come when we don't set the limits, when we don't establish the boundaries. Why? Because our children don't know who's in charge. Our children don't understand what is expected of them. If you allow them to do whatever they want, or if you are always giving in when they don't want to do what you want, then the power struggle ensues, because you as the adult know that something needs to take place, whether it's a bedtime, whether it's toilet training, whether it's chores for Shabbos, whatever it might be. And the children don't understand that you mean business. They don't understand that it has to be done. So they're going to try to get out of it. They're going to try to maneuver around it. And the reality is that that's when power struggles ensue. So I don't think that I'm going to be able to teach you to take away all power struggles, because this is something parents have been fighting with for forever. But I'd like to take away the power battles, the really explosive battles that come and that stick around time after time after time. So how do we avoid that? Well, let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to those wonderful babies that you bring home from the hospital. They're cute, they're innocent, you're so in love, your heart is full. And part of why we're so in love and our heart is full is they don't answer back yet. That it seems like we're in charge. They love us unconditionally. Now that's true, they do. But the reality is we're already not in charge, okay? Part of setting limits and part of boundaries and rules in a home is to establish a bit of equilibrium. It's to establish a sense of control for the parents, and I don't mean control in a bad way. I mean it in a healthy, productive way, because kids are in charge. They really do rule the roost. So we need to balance it by setting limits. So we bring those adorable babies home from the hospital, and guess what? Who decides when they sleep? They do. Who decides when they eat? They do. Who decides when their diaper has to be changed? They do. Now, of course, some of you may be saying, oh, really? What about the parents that just don't pay attention? I'm really speaking today about positive, healthy parenting. I'm talking about all of you wonderful parents who are watching this because you want to learn and you want to give the best to your children. You are going to respond to your child's needs. So really, the child is in charge already. They're going to determine when you get to go to sleep. Okay? All of a sudden, you have somebody else determining when you get to sleep. They're going to determine when you get to sit down for 5 minutes. Or in fact, I remember being a new mother, they're going to determine when you get to take a shower. So in reality, the babies are already in charge. But they don't quite answer back yet. They may cry back, but they don't answer back. So now we're going to move to toddlerhood. And that's when it becomes crucial to set limits. Now again, you may respond and say, well, what about setting sleep schedules and eating schedules when they're infants? That's an entirely different lecture, and one that is a lecture all unto itself, is how to parent infants up until age 18 months to 2 years. But we're going to talk today and concentrate on when they can start to answer back, on when you need to set limits and develop house rules. So those toddlers hit that age, and they're adorable, but they're fast, and they are into everything, and they are already asserting themselves. They're individuating. The terrible twos, why do we call them the terrible twos? Because the kids are already trying to set their own limits. They're trying to push the limits. They're trying to individuate and become their own little people. But we as parents, as responsible parents, we need to start setting limits for them. At this age, the limits that we set for our children are often for safety reasons, and they often include the word no. No, don't touch that. No, don't go up the stairs by yourself. No, you can't go outside by yourself and play. And no, don't stand up in the shopping cart because you're going to get hurt. All of these limits, all of these rules that we try to enforce are mostly at this point for safety. But so begins the power struggle. How often do you go somewhere and you see a parent, an adult, struggling with a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, and who's winning? The reality is, often it's the child who's winning because we get into a power struggle. I teach parents all the time, and especially young parents, if you get into a power struggle with your child, you have lost. The idea is to practice radical acceptance that this is their stage of life, and allow yourself to do what you need to do to keep them safe and healthy and secure. We're going to talk about that because that is setting limits and then providing consequences. That power struggle that takes place is a major trigger for temper tantrums, and it continues as they get older. We've all seen teenagers have temper tantrums. It just looks a little different, but that's still what it is. I'm always fascinated that one of children's first 10 words is some form of the word no. So from this time on, from the time they're toddlers, our job as parents is to set limits for our children, and it's our children's job to constantly test those limits. From age 18 months and on until adulthood, we as parents have to struggle and maneuver through a minefield. And that minefield is our children's willfulness, but also look at it in the positive as their individuation. We have to find a balance between wanting our kids to like us and being the adults in their life. Many parents don't set limits because they want their children to like them. Our children don't need to like us. They need to love us. And I'm sure you've all heard this. We don't need to be our child's friend. We need to be their parent. Part of that distinction is what I'm talking about today. It's about setting limits. I find this is an especially, as I said, especially huge for very young parents. I'm a big proponent of parent education. I truly, truly believe that to be parents, we need to be educated. And I'm sure you've heard this before, but the fact that you can't drive a car until you take a course and pass a test, but that you can raise children, I do believe is an issue. I'm not sure what we can do about it, but I applaud all of you who are watching this because you're already doing something about it. But just be careful that the parenting that you learn includes limit setting. There are many people today who do not espouse to that, who want everything to be a democracy, who want to discuss everything with their children, who want to have the children be a part of every decision. I truly believe that sometimes the answer to our children in a very respectful way has to be no, because I'm the parent and I say so. And that doesn't mean that you're putting them down, and it doesn't mean that you're dismissing them. I'm going to speak about that soon. It means that as a parent, you have the right, and I believe the obligation, to set a limit for your children. Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, in his essays on Jewish education, speaks about parenting. And he says that once we have children, the reason we continue to exist in this world is to do chesed for those children, to do good for those children. But Rav Hirsch explains very clearly that doing good for the children does not always mean saying yes and giving them everything. It means giving them what they need, even when sometimes that's really hard. And he speaks about the fact that he'd rather a parent cry because it hurts them that they had to say no to their child than the child getting hurt. This is what limit setting is about. This is what boundaries are about. This is what house rules are about. The reality is that the literature shows that children crave limits and boundaries. It helps them to feel safe, they know what's expected of them, and they know what to expect in their home. Children, especially small children, love rituals. They love knowing Erev Shabbos that the candles get set up, or that we give tzedakah before we light the candles, or whatever the routines and rituals are in the home. So too with what's expected of them. Children who know from a very young age what a job is for them, Erev Shabbos, will do their job. And it will not be a constant power struggle to get them to do it, because it's part of knowing what the expectation is of them. This safety gives children the confidence to go out, to explore, to grow, and to gain a self-confidence that will help them do anything out there in the world. I feel very strongly, as you can probably tell already, that parents make a crucial mistake when they allow their children to live without limits and without rules. There are a few issues that not setting limits presents in parenting. Number one, every family needs rules. If a family has no rules, if a family has no norm, they can become dysfunctional. Every family that has rules, they may seem dysfunctional. I always say that every family is dysfunctional. It just depends on how much they function within that dysfunction. But rules and limits help a family to function. If we don't have rules and we don't have limits, it's like the Wild West. It's a free-for-all, and there's no way for a family to function. If you find that you're struggling in your home and that you feel like everybody is doing their own thing and that nobody will listen, and that an Erev Shabbos, an Erev Yontiv, an evening, the mornings trying to get out to school are especially difficult times, one of the things that you need to look at is setting limits. And we're going to talk about how to do it. I don't think that home should be a democracy. Somebody needs to be in charge. It's the parents. But I don't believe that it's a dictatorship either. I think that we're going to talk about children need to be heard. They need to know that their voice can be heard. But at the end of the day, the parents get to set the limits and they do get to make the rules. Number two issue with not setting limits. As children grow and mature, they're going to test the limits. As we said, from age 18 months, when they say no every time you want them to do something, until teenagehood, where limit setting can get very broad, if we don't give them limits, then they don't know how to test the limits. If there are limits for children, then they know what pushing those limits are. If there are no limits, then there's just no limit as to where they can go. And it's sort of like sending somebody out into space without tethering them to the ship. They're just going to free float out there, and they have no way to anchor themselves and get back. That's one thing that can happen if families don't set limits. I have teenagers that I work with who have said to me very often, in families where there are no limits, that they get into trouble because they don't know what to do to get their parents' attention, that the behavior becomes more and more outrageous. Because if there are no limits, and if there are no consequences, and everything is just talked about, then the reality is what they need to do to get their parents' attention becomes more and more at risk and more outrageous. Number three reason to set limits. We live in a world where children have issues today with respect and authority. Unfortunately, it's not like it was. And my kids always hate when I say, well, when I was growing up, but reality is when I was growing up, it was different. And today, children don't have respect for authority the way that they should. Part of our job in parenting is to model this in our homes so that our children grow up to respect their teachers, their Rebbeim, Das Torah, their bosses one day, because it will hamper their growth. It will not do well for them if they don't respect that authority. And part of them respecting authority is respecting our authority as parents, is respecting the limits that we set, is respecting the boundaries and the rules that we lay down, not because we're on a power trip. That's not healthy parenting. If you lay down rules because you're on a power trip and you just want to put down rules for your children, that's not positive or healthy parenting. And that's what we're talking about today. But you're laying down rules and limits because that is healthy for your children, because it will help your children to grow and to become the adults you want them to be. Parents ask me all the time, what's the magic balance? I want to set limits, but I don't want to be a tyrant. I want to have rules, but I don't want to be a prison warden. And I understand that parents, often young parents, are really confused about what the limits are and how to set them. I can't be specific. Limits are different for every family. The rules, the boundaries, the limits we set are based so much on us each as individuals, on our families of origin, and our community's value system. That is how we set our limits. We as parents have to set limits that we believe in. Please, I'm going to repeat that again. Please set limits and house rules that you believe in, that we can model. Don't talk the talk if you're not willing to walk the walk, because our children are truth barometers. All children are truth barometers, and they smell hypocrisy a mile away. So if you tell them to do something or to live a certain way, and they see you living differently, they will not follow your rules. They will not respect your rules. They will not care what limits you've set. And then it will be a constant power struggle. And on that note, I just want to mention, parents really need to think about the schools that they send their children to. When you choose a school, you choose a school along with the value system of that school. It's important to choose a school that has a similar value system to your home, or to move your home similar to the value system of the school. When kids grow up and the value systems and the limits and the rules are one at school and totally different at home, they grow up confused, they grow up mistrustful of authority, and they grow up feeling like, what could it really matter? Because if my parents don't think that's important, then obviously it's really not. So let's talk practicalities. Any of you have ever heard me speak? No, I believe in being practical. I always want people to walk away from something learning something. So I'm sure many of you are watching this because you want to know how to set limits and you want to know how to stick to them. So first thing I want to say is that sticking to limits is really, really hard work. Be kind to yourselves. Cut yourself some slack. You're going to mess up. Don't be so hard on yourselves and just keep trying. If you mess up, try again. Every day is a new day, but stick with your limit setting, stick with your house rules, and stick with your consequences, which we're going to talk about. So I want to give you 7 rules of setting effective limits in your home and how to avoid power struggles. Number 1, and this is something that I think people usually skip, but it's probably the most crucial step. Spend time as parents deciding what you want your house rules and your limits to be. Don't make them up on the spot. This is something that I encourage couples to do before they actually have their first child. This is something I talk to couples about in premarital education. But if you are already married and you already have children, sit down as soon as possible and really make up a list of what your values are, what your limits are, and what your house rules are. These can include bedtime, chores in the house and responsibilities, TV or no TV, computer and internet rules, homework policies, school expectations, mealtime rules, level of halachic observance, and a million others. Those are just some I think of off the top of my head. You have to sit down and you have to come up with categories, and you need to decide what are your house rules. What style of parenting do you believe in, and how should that be reflected in the limits and rules you set up? If you are lucky enough and parenting in a 2-family home, decide this as a team and commit to parenting as a team. Children work very, very hard and are very talented at dividing and conquering. If you give them any inkling that the 2 of you are not a team and that one of you is setting limits and the other one doesn't agree, they will steamroll right over you and they will push the limits as far as they can. You must present as a team. If you disagree, work it out beforehand, and sometimes it's okay that you take turns of whose limit you use. Okay, not every limit is earth-shattering. So if one parent thinks that bedtime should be at 7 and the other thinks it should be at 8, I'm just giving an example, it's not necessarily worth arguing over so much, because one of you take bedtime and one of you take something else. And you can agree to disagree, like all positive communication with couples, and you can take turns of whose way goes. If you're parenting in a single-parent home, this is probably even more important and much harder to do. Often when parents are divorced, they differ in their house rules and in the limits they set for their children. And this becomes so confusing for children. I encourage that even if you need a third party to mediate, deciding what your family rules are, deciding what are the limits in your parenting, please try to do so. Try to sit down with somebody that you both respect and try to work it out. You don't have to have it exactly the same in each house, but there has to be respect and some continuity to what you both do. This provides children with much needed stability and security. Okay, number 2. So number 1 was decide what you want to do, what your values are, what your rules are going to be, and actually put them on paper. Okay? They're going to keep changing. As kids get older, as things change, you're going to keep changing them. And it's also interesting to keep the papers, put them in a notebook, so that over the years you can watch how things evolve. Number 2, so important. Consistency, consistency, consistency. Kids are so creative. Kids are so manipulative. They're lovely, they're wonderful, I love them. But really, they're out to get us. I'm kidding, but on some level they are. If they see a way to test the limits, they will work around your rules and they will get you. If you're not consistent, if they see you're not consistent, then they know they don't have to follow the limits that you're setting. Consistency must begin when children are little. Now, some of you may be watching this and saying, uh-oh, forget it, I missed the boat. My kids are already preteens or they're pre-bar mitzvah age, bas mitzvah age. Forget it, I missed the boat. No, you didn't. It's just going to be a little harder. And it's going to take some extra work, a little more complicated than I can go into right now. But for those of you watching this whose children are younger, this is where consistency begins. Consistency needs to begin in toddlerhood. Younger children need it for their safety and security. Older children need it for our sanity. If we're consistent with our older children, they will be easier children, and then we will have an easier time. Now, being consistent doesn't mean you're always right. It doesn't mean that you're the authority and there's nothing else. I'm a big believer in parents acknowledging their mistakes to their children and apologizing. And parents will often say to me, but that undermines my authority. If I tell my kids I was wrong, then they'll think I don't know what I'm talking about and they won't listen to me. It's exactly the opposite. If you can acknowledge and you can respect your kids enough to tell them, I set this limit or I set this rule, but the way I dealt with it was wrong. Or I think this might be a wrong limit for our family or a wrong rule, and you can be forward with that, you are modeling for them a crucial life lesson. Taking responsibility, admitting, apologizing, and then regrouping. Children who learn that grow up to be very successful adults, successful spouses, and again, successful parents. Consistency also doesn't mean that the kids can't be part of an ever-developing house rules. I think it's really important for kids to have a say. I just don't think they get the final say. So listening to your kids and hearing them doesn't mean you're not being consistent. And changing things as kids get older, as time moves on, as you see what works, also doesn't mean you're not consistent. But if there is a rule in the house and children test it or break it, and you don't follow through on the consequences that you have decided upon, that means you're not being consistent. And then children won't follow your rules. Number 3, be respectful of your children's feelings, their moods, their thoughts, and yes, their stress levels. A lot of children are very anxious today. And a lot of kids in school, stress is a big part of their life. We have to be conscious of that when we make our rules and when we set our limits. Speak to your children. Treat them in a respectful manner and listen to what they have to say about limits and rules. It doesn't mean that you have to change your mind, and you have to let them know, I want to hear what you have to say, but at the end of the day, Daddy and I, Mommy and I, whoever it is, are going to make the final decision, but we want you to be a part of it. The fact that they feel heard and that you model that respect, they're more likely to respect your rules. Also, if they had a part in creating it, especially consequences, I'm a big believer in, especially older children, asking them what appropriate consequences might be for certain rule breaking and pushing the limits. When kids have come up with the consequences, when they're part of the decision-making process, they're much more likely to follow the rules. It's really important to remember that children will push and at times break the rules, and they will break your limit setting. Do not, and I'm going to repeat it one more time, please do not put them down or demean them because they do that. They're not being bad. It's not a personal attack against you, although sometimes it feels like it is. It is what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to push the limits. We're supposed to keep the limits there. They feel safe. They're able to grow. They become adults. It's how the process goes. Now, that gets sticky as we go through 18 years of it, but it's not that they're bad kids because they push those limits. Perhaps we need to look at ourselves and wonder what was our role in our kids pushing the limits or breaking the rules. Number 4, have a set of consequences for breaking the rules and pushing the limits. It never works to think on the spot, to come up with the consequence at that moment, because usually what happens, we come up with a huge consequence because we're angry and we're frustrated, and we blurt out that you're not going on the trip when we all go, or you're staying home when everybody goes somewhere else, or you have to stay in your room for the next month. Whatever it is that our insides and our kishkas, we're so frustrated that we just blurt it out, and then we can't follow through. And then we lose consistency, we lose their trust, we lose their respect, and it does not work. And then it becomes a power struggle back and forth. The same way as I'm saying that I think you need to prepare what your rules are, your house rules, and set your limits in advance, with each of those has to come appropriate consequences. And again, I use the word consequences consciously. I don't believe in punishing. Punishing is something we do because we feel we've been insulted, or we feel that our kids acting out is an affront to us. That's punishment, and that is not appropriate chinuch. But consequences for breaking the limits and breaking the rules is absolutely appropriate, and how they learn to keep the rules and to follow the limits that we have set. Each parent needs to take a look at what their consequences should be and what they feel is appropriate. This will change constantly. When I was giving consequences to my children, it obviously was not a consequence to take away a cell phone. It was not a consequence to take away DS games or whatever it is. Now it is. So consequences are constantly going to change, and they're also going to change as your children progress. I can't give specifics because, again, it's pertinent to each family. But my advice is to make a list of ages. Toddler, 5 to 7, 7 to 9, 10 to 12, 12 to 14, 15 to 17. After age 17, good luck. And then make certain categories. Bedtimes, chores, whatever your limit setting categories are. Every family's list is going to be unique. Each child's list may be unique, and there should be 1 or 2 consequences for each limit and for each rule that could be broken. As I said, it's important to decide what your rules and limits are. It takes the same planning to decide what the consequences are. And this is somewhere where I would include your children. They can help decide what some of the consequences are. Again, parenting is constantly changing. You're going to keep recontracting. You're going to keep talking to your kids. One of the things I would like to propose to you in an idea is that in order to do this and to keep talking, I believe in a once-a-month family meeting. Many families will choose to do it Rosh Chodesh because then they'll have a nice dinner and they'll have a family meeting. What worked this month? What didn't work this month? What should we change? Are there consequences we should add? Are there rules that should be updated or not updated? And remind the children that no matter what, the final say is the parent's say. But talk to them. Get their ideas, get their input. Again, they're going to be much more likely to follow and to abide by the limits if they're a part of it. Number 5, be a team. As parents, it's so common but so detrimental. Please do not play good cop, bad cop. This is important in traditional two-family homes and even more important in single-family homes. Kids need to know that parents are a team, that they both believe in the limits that have been set and in the house rules, and that the kids can't divide and conquer. It's also important to remember that making yourself the easy, fun parents and letting the other parents, sort of throwing them under the bus and letting them be the sole disciplinarian, usually backfires at some point, because the kids, as they grow older, don't actually respect the fun parents the way they do the disciplinarian. I propose that both parents should be fun at times, both should be disciplinarians, and it needs to be done as a team. Number 6, be good role models. Talk and talk, walk the walk. Sorry, talk the talk and walk the walk. If kids see you not respecting the rules that you've set down, whether it's around halachic observance, whether it's around authority, whether it's around helping out in the house, then they are not going to follow those rules. Please don't even expect them to follow those rules. Number 7, be proud of the rules and the limits that you set. Believe in what you're trying to establish for your family. It's a good thing. You are raising your children right by doing this, and be proud of it. Applaud yourselves. When there's a consequence that goes well, when there's a limit setting that's been having trouble, and then the children get with the program, applaud yourselves. Give yourselves a pat on the back. Treat yourselves to something. It's important as parents to understand that this is hard work, but it's absolutely worth it. And if you're consistent and you're respectful of what your children need, and you're respectful of your home and of your own values, your children will grow up healthier, happier, and they will thank you for it. Thank you.